votes. So thank you, Representative Edwards, for bringing us together on a very important discussion.
I'd like to yield to my colleague, Donna Christensen.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank both of you for helping to organize this hour, and our colleague from New York for joining us. You know, I was in medical school here in Washington, D.C. on the day that Dr. King was assassinated, and it was obviously a very dark day and weekend that followed. But I recall, and I think it would have had to have been the Sunday of the following week, was a Sunday dedicated to Dr. Martin Luther King. And on that day, as you went to church or were out and about D.C., there was such a feeling of fellowship and brotherhood and respect for each other, and even, I would say, love for each other as neighbors in this country and on this planet. It would be wonderful to see the spirit of that day revived in this Congress and across our nation as we remember not only the day, but more importantly, the words and the legacy of Dr. King, and as we remember all that he was fighting for. Specifically tonight, we remember the sanitation workers whose strike he went out to Nashville to support on that fateful evening. And in his speech, you mentioned a few things that he said in that speech the night before he was killed. He called also for his listeners to develop a dangerous unselfishness, and said that the question before them, and I would say the question before us today, is not, and I'm quoting here, is not if I stop to help the sanitation workers, and I'm going to add in here, or as we would say today, not if we stop to help the sanitation workers, the teachers, the firefighters, the policemen, and all the workers whose rights are under attack in our country today, what will happen to my job? But he said, the question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? And as our colleague from New York said, his concern went beyond that. It was also what would happen to our nation. He also then said right after that, and I'm quoting here again, let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. These words are an urgent call to us today as well, as both of my colleagues have said, to stand with a greater determination on behalf of the working men and women in this country, to stand with a greater determination for help for the poor, to stand with a greater determination for clean air and clean energy for us and our children, clean air for our children and us to breathe, and clean energy in responding to the threat of climate change. To stand with greater determination for jobs and economic opportunity, especially for the most distressed parts of our country. To stand with greater determination for a quality education for every child, and to stand with greater determination for equal access to quality health care and wellness for everyone in this country, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender identity, or geography. Another quote from Dr. King that I use often as we talk about health disparities is this quote. He said, of all of the forms of injustice, it is in health care that it is most shocking and inhumane. And I want to focus on that for a moment, because among the many challenges that we face today is that of eliminating the injustice in health care. We Democrats took a major step forward in this effort with the passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act in the 111th Congress. Not only does it expand coverage to millions of Americans and families who have never had insurance before, but it also includes provisions that would end the travesty which Dr. Martin Luther King called the most shocking and inhumane. And now that the health care door is finally being opened to all, now that we have furthered the effort to end discrimination that exists in our health system, now that we have a chance to end the tens of thousands of premature preventable deaths in people of color, and the poor, and those who live in our rural areas and our territories, now that we've done all of that, the Republican majority is doing everything they can think of to try and slam that door shut again. In this 40th anniversary year, the Congressional Black Caucus is committed to building upon the legacy of our founders. And in the area of health, we're particularly committed to specifically building on the legacy of Congressman Louis Stokes, to not only let that door or any door be closed to African Americans or to anyone anywhere in this country. We will not let those doors be closed. And we know that our Democrats will stand with us with greater determination to protect the Affordable Care Law and the lives of countless Americans who would continue to be in jeopardy without that law. And it's time for the good people of this country to stand with us. Let us not have to repent, as Dr. King said, not for the actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. This country should no longer tolerate that African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans have a much higher infant mortality than our white counterparts. That diabetes and its complications should be so much higher in those same populations as well as in Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. Or that African Americans should have higher death rates from cancer and diabetes than all of the other population groups. Or that Native Americans should have higher deaths from sudden infant death syndrome and chronic liver disease than all of the other population groups combined. Or that Asian Americans should have such high incidences of tuberculosis, about 24 times the average national rate, and higher incidence of hepatitis B. And no longer should this country tolerate that in 2010, after 8 years, that the Department of Human Services would still be reporting in the National Health Disparities Report that fewer than 20% of disparities faced by African Americans, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and Hispanics showed any evidence of narrowing. Fewer than 20% showed any evidence of narrowing. It's time for all of us to rise to our better natures, as Dr. King would call us to do, and to begin to work together to close gaps faced in many different areas by large segments of our population. We must stand in stronger determination to build that better nation and to realize the beloved community that Dr. King envisioned. In our 40th year, the Congressional Black Caucus remains more committed, more determined than ever to realizing his dream, a dream that still burns brightly in the hearts of all of us who honor Dr. Martin Luther King and the life that he gave to ensure freedom and justice on behalf of all of us. With that, I'll yield back to you, Congresswoman Edwards.
Thank you, Dr. Christensen. I want to take this moment to yield to my colleague, Vice Chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus from the great state, my original home state of North Carolina, G.K. Butterfield.
Let me thank the gentlelady for yielding the time this evening and thank her for her leadership in the Congress. The Congressional Black Caucus goes out of its way each week to try to present to the nation issues that are critically important to African Americans residing in this country, and Congresswoman Donna Edwards and Congresswoman Christensen have been in the forefront of making that happen, and so I want to thank them so very much for their leadership. I especially want to thank them for their willingness to come to the floor tonight to commemorate the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. April 4th always brings back memories of a very tragic day in the life of our country. It is a day that I shall never, ever forget. The civil rights movement and the voting rights movement took place during my years in high school. Those were very precious moments in my history, and I remember so well the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The world must remember, our country must remember, we must understand that Martin Luther King's leadership was very profound, but it only lasted for about 13 years. So many people don't recognize that. Dr. King started his leadership at age 26, and it tragically ended at age 39. It was on December 1st of 1955 that Dr. King was drafted at age 26. He was drafted to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. That was the day in Alabama history when the black citizens of Montgomery decided that they would boycott city buses until they could sit anywhere they wanted, instead of being relegated to the back when a white citizen boarded the bus. And so a black seamstress named Rosa Parks was denied a seat of her choice because of the color of her skin. And Dr. King, at the age of 26, took the leadership of that movement and focused the attention of the world on this injustice, and the Supreme Court of this country the following year agreed with his position. And then several years later, in April of 1963, it was on a Friday evening, it was Good Friday, Dr. King again led a march in Birmingham, Alabama, to end segregation in public accommodations. Dr. King was arrested and spent the next 11 days confined in jail. And during that time, Mr. Speaker, he wrote that great document called Letter from Birmingham Jail. And I would only wish that our citizens would look up that letter on the internet and read for themselves, Letter from the Birmingham Jail. And several weeks later, the Birmingham leaders announced that local accommodations would be integrated. And so after that great victory in Birmingham, and after Dr. King wrote his letter, Dr. King and other civil rights leaders planned and then they executed the 1963 March on Washington. And so many of us have heard of, and some of us participated in that march. It was a hot summer day here in the nation's capital on August 28, 1963. I was there as a young 16-year-old high school student. That march was a demand. It was a demand for civil rights legislation. President John F. Kennedy had agreed with the movement and had made a historic speech on June 11, 1963, calling on this nation to end segregation in public accommodations. And on June 20th, 1963, a bill was introduced into this House of Representatives here on Capitol Hill. And that bill was fiercely debated to provide civil rights for all citizens. But then the march took place in August of 1963, and it was a great day. 250,000 people descended on the nation's capital demanding civil rights. And less than 90 days later, President Kennedy was tragically assassinated in Dallas, Texas. But as a result of his assassination, President Johnson, becoming the president of our country, promised the nation that the civil rights bill that was pending in the Congress would continue to be debated and it would be signed into law, and it was on July 2nd, 1964. And so after that civil rights bill was passed, Dr. King received the coveted Nobel Peace Prize, and we honor and we celebrate that great history. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Civil Rights Act was not enough. There had to be a voting rights bill that was debated and passed by this Congress. And finally, in 1965, Congress passed the 1965 Voting Rights Act because of the work of Dr. King. Because of the Voting Rights Act, there has now been a transformation, a political transformation in the southern part of our country where I am from. I represent eastern North Carolina, which is a community in my state that suffered from years of discrimination and electoral discrimination. But I'm proud to say that in my congressional district alone, there are more than 300 African-American elected officials elected to office, and we attribute much of this success to the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And so I want to thank the gentlelady for recognizing this great American on this day. My hometown of Wilson, North Carolina, was supposed to have been the visit of Dr. King on this day in 1968. But because of the events in Memphis, Tennessee, he diverted and went to Memphis to aid with the garbage strike and to help those who could not help themselves. And so we celebrate this great legacy tonight. I thank the gentlelady. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Butterfield, for your leadership as a vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, but also for your reminder of our so important history that is linked both to the struggle of African Americans in this country to the struggle of labor, and for a reminder also historically of the fact that Dr. King was supposed to have had a next place to be when his life was ended on April 4th, 43 years ago today. So thank you, Congressman Butterfield. And I'd like to take just this moment, if I could, to recount for us the history of the 1968 American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Memphis Sanitation Workers Strike, the chronology. Beginning on Sunday, January 31st of that year, the rain sent workers home. Then, beginning on Tuesday, February 1st of that year, two sanitation workers were killed in an accident on a city truck. Then, just days later, on Monday, February 12th, Memphis sanitation and public employees went on strike after last-minute attempts to resolve their grievances had failed. While the newspapers claimed that 200 workers of the 1,300 remained on the job, but really only 38 of 180 trucks moved. The mayor of the city said the strike is illegal, but that his office stood ready to talk to anyone about legitimate questions of the time. Little did these workers know that through the month of February, as black leaders and ministers gathered from citywide organizations in support of the strike, through the days of March, when the ministers in the city announced that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would come to Memphis, as 116 strikers and supporters were arrested for sitting at City Hall. And then through the month of March, the newspapers claimed that the strike was failing as scabs were operating 90 garbage trucks. But 17,000 Memphians attended a rally where Dr. King called for a citywide march on March 22nd. And then as Dr. King returned to Memphis on April 3rd, and he addressed the rally, delivering his famous "I've been to the mountaintop" address. And then that day on April 4th, 1968, as he prepared to march with the workers, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on the balcony of his hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. And in the days following his assassination, the workers continued their strike in honor of Dr. King and with renewed courage and resolve to demand safe and working conditions. It's this simple phrase, "I am a man," that drove him. A simple phrase, one that acknowledged their humanhood, one that acknowledged them as workers. I am a man. And then finally, on April 16th, some 3 months after the start of their strike, the sanitation workers of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, agreed and reached an agreement with the city officials granting an increase in pay, a grievance procedure, and overtime pay. This is the history of the sanitation workers of Memphis. It is the history of workers throughout this country, and it's the history of workers today. And with that, I'd like to yield to the congressman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Whatever order, it's fine with you, Representative Edwards, to join with you. You know, the dignity that was addressed, the respect factor of "I am a man," that rhetoric that speaks to the working individual, that speaks to humanity, the man, the woman, the child, the dignity of the individual, the respect shown, is all that was embraced in that message that struck all of America, touched all Americans. And, you know, I'm of the age that I remember that tragic day. And it came so clustered. In a short 5 years, we lost 3 great leaders to bullets. And it is just really a tragic outcome that really can't help but find yourself questioning, what if their march continued? How different would America be? I find it so interesting that his last major appearance and effort was for workers, fighting for workers, for the dignity of work and the dignity of workers. The assault on workers' rights that he was addressing, we see today in the news. We see it in Wisconsin. We see it in Michigan. We see it in Ohio. And it's like the same battles are here to be fought and won. And so the spirit of Martin encourages, I think, builds our determination and our resilience to make a difference. The efforts that America needs to associate with the overall cause and concern for job creation and job retention is so vitally important. You know, many would choose to have us believe that it's a high rate of firings that it's occurring out there, but it's really a low rate of hirings, which is a different sort of saga. And we need to invest now in worker opportunities, in training, retraining, in education, in job creation. I'm a firm believer that, and I know many are, that unemployment is driving our deficit, and that if we invest in jobs, if we invest in the worker, we will see a corresponding benefit on the flip side of a reduced deficit for this nation. And so I think the stats tell it all. The bottom 50% of income earners in the United States now collectively own less than 1% of the nation's wealth. That's a startling fact. And we need to make certain that there is more justice that is produced out there. As I said earlier, I really do believe that the purchasing power that we can enhance for America's working families, for our middle class, for the mainstream worker out there is an empowerment for all of us. Someone needs to purchase the products that those perched on the top may produce by their ownership. But the worker to build that product and the worker to buy that product is an important key, perhaps most important ingredient in the equation. And when we look at the fact that some 5 people are lined up for every job opportunity in this country, and when we look at the fact that workers' rights are under assault today in many areas across this country, there is a great amount of unfinished business. And on this anniversary commemoration of a great leader's death, it is important for us to recommit our energies and our spirit to speaking to the needs of America's workers. Nothing could honor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy and that man more vibrantly than speaking to job creation, job retention, workers' rights, and prevention of what we're seeing happening where there's an assault on those rights across this country. So again, thank you, Representative Edwards, for really bringing this solemn opportunity together on this floor where so many issues were addressed in favorable measure that were driven by the courage and the boldness and the noble vision of Dr. Martin Luther King and other great leaders like JFK and RFK who traveled that same era in history.
I thank the gentleman from New York and appreciate your leadership and your being here this evening to mark this day with us for workers. And with that, I yield to the Congresswoman from the Virgin Islands, Donna Christensen.
And it should give all of the workers who are fighting for their rights today extra incentive, some extra inspiration as we commemorate this day and all that Dr. Martin Luther King fought for as they continue that fight, and we continue to support them in that fight. And I'm reminded that on April 7th in the capital of Illinois, in Springfield, I was out there a week ago, they will be having a major rally on behalf of working people in this country. So I want to salute the folks in Springfield on that march. But in addition to fighting for workers' rights, when Dr. King died, he was planning the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, and I was here studying for my boards and went over to volunteer in the medical tent. And it rained and it poured, but people came in from all over this country, particularly the South, to the Poor People's Campaign to call attention to the plight of the poor in this country. And as we're celebrating as a Congressional Black Caucus our 40th anniversary, we're still carrying on that fight. Our main agenda theme is creating pathways out of poverty, and we've had that as our agenda for the last 2 years, and we continue with that for this Congress as well. But that was a remarkable time as well. I think it did a lot to change my life in the middle of my medical studies, and the course of my career probably has something to do with why I'm here today. But I wanted to also just remind everyone that as we fight for the workers and remember Dr. King's fight for working men and women, he also was steadfastly working to help to find pathways out of poverty for those who were poor then, and we continue in our 40th year to fight for those who are poor and to help them to find ways and to help to lift them up and lift their families up out of poverty. So I'll yield back to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Christensen, and also for your leadership for us in bringing us together in these important hours on the floor of the House of Representatives to discuss the issues that are the deepest concerns to communities of color, to working families across this country, and a reminder of the reason that many of us have chosen to serve. You know, Dr. King knew so deeply that the middle class is indeed the backbone of the American economy, and that by strengthening the middle class, we move our nation forward. He would understand today that by giving tax breaks to oil companies and special wealthy, we forget our allegiance to the most populous among us, the middle class. He understood the importance of the struggle of sanitation workers, of organizing workers, of making sure that workers were able to take care of themselves and their families as a way of moving workers into the middle class. He understood, like so many of us do, that particularly for African American people, that our connection to organized labor is so important because it is through the ability to organize and to fight for our rights against injustice that we're able to move our families into the middle class. Dr. King knew so tremendously the connection between the plight of Negroes and working people. He said at the AFL-CIO convention in December 1961, and I quote, "Negroes are almost entirely a working people. There are pitifully few Negro millionaires and few Negro employers. Our needs are identical with labor's needs: decent wages, fair working conditions, livable housing, old age security, health and welfare measures, conditions in which families can grow, have education for their children, and respect in the community." Dr. King spoke those words in December 1961. Those words could be spoken today. Dr. King reminded the workers of the United Auto Workers District 65 Convention in September 1962 that in the area of politics, that labor and African Americans, Negroes, have identical interests. He said, and I quote again, "Labor has grave problems today of employment, shorter hours, old age security, housing, and retraining against the impact of automation." The Congress and the administration are almost as indifferent to labor's program as they are toward that of the Negro. Toward both, they offer vastly less than adequate remedies for the problems which are a torment to us day after day. Those words spoken today speak to the plight of the workforce, to minority communities, to working families across this country. Spoken in 1962 could be spoken today in 2011, some 40-some years later. You know, one of the things that I continue to be touched by is that I was just a young girl when Dr. King died on April 4th, but I always remember that day. I remember that day in my family. I remember the sadness and the tragedy, but I also remember the struggle. And I think generations since my own and up until now recall that struggle. And I think today for the sanitation workers and remembering their struggle of some 3 months to gain the respect and dignity in the workplace, I am a man. Now today we might write this, if we had to create this placard today, we might write, I am a woman, I am a man, I am a human being, but it still speaks to the same value, to the value of humanity and justice in the workplace. And that's the value that Dr. King spoke to. It is a value for which he died. It is a value that lives in his legacy. And so, again, I'm just pleased that my colleagues have been able to join with us today, not on a day of sadness, April 4th, but on a day of remembrance, on a day of reinvigoration and recommitment to those ideals that have guided us and that continue us in our struggle with and for the workers across this country. And with that, I would like to yield again just very briefly to my colleague from New York, Paul Tonko.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. You know, I would have to say that I truly believe that if Dr. King were in our presence today, he would remind us that a budget is a series of priorities. And what we place high, what we place most precious in that budget, we would see that as a document that speaks to a family. Just like a household will balance their needs, their concerns with their abilities to pay and put together the balancing, so too does the family of America require that sort of tender balancing. And he would remind us that, you know, here are families, whether they're employed, critically unemployed, or marginally underemployed, whatever the situation might be. Today, America's middle class is living paycheck to paycheck. That's becoming more and more the scenario. And he would have suggested that, look, we need to take that concern for mortgages, that concern for college tuition, that concern for just pay, the concern for utility bills, the concern for food costs and energy costs. Take all of that, invest in the American working families. Contrast that with what the other scenario might look like. Handouts to oil companies, corporate loopholes that are not shut, tax breaks for the most comfortable in society. That is the contrast he would challenge us to face head on and to understand it's about social and economic justice. It's about bringing more balance, more fairness into the equation. As a clergyman, you know, he embraced the faith and brought it into the community, brought it into America, challenged us to respond in compassionate measure. We have it within our means to do this in a fair and just way. And that's why we are at a tipping point in this nation's history where we need to look at revitalizing the middle class. I represent many modest annual income households, and they have told me their fear is about maintaining their home. Their fear is about educating their children. Their fear is about tomorrow having the opportunity. I'm optimistic that we can do it because we have the skills here within the Congress to make it happen and make it work in a progressive fashion. Do we have the will? And that would be the challenge. That would be the challenge from Dr. King this very evening. Do we have the will to move forward in progressive fashion? So thank you, Donna Edwards. Thank you, Representative Edwards, for bringing us together tonight in tribute to a giant of an individual, an icon in our midst.
Thank you, Mr. Tonko. And with that, I'd like to yield to Congresswoman Christensen.
Thank you. Just briefly, and I want to again thank you for helping us to commemorate not only the sanitation workers' strike, but the life and legacy of Dr. King. And it is unfortunate that as we are here tonight remembering the day that the assassination took place of this great American and great human being, that on the day after we expect a budget that is going to do just the opposite of what Dr. King would have wanted us to do. In the last Congress, we were able to strengthen Medicare, to expand its solvency, 12 years. We were able to pass the Affordable Care Act, which would expand Medicaid and make sure that just because you were poor, you were not going to not have the ability to have quality health care. And tomorrow, We expect the budget that's going to come to talk about privatizing Medicare and ending it as we know it, sacrificing the health care for seniors and children, making an enormous cut in Medicaid, and really taking away the hope that people had when we passed that Affordable Care Act, that they could not only have health care, but really aspire to improving their health and the entire well-being of themselves, their families, and their communities. So as we meet here this evening to talk about Dr. King and to talk about the challenges that our working men and women have, talk about the challenges of health care for those who are poor, of all race and ethnicity, and to recommit ourselves in the memory of Dr. King to fighting for working men and women and those who need that extra hand to lift themselves and their families out of poverty. I just want to say that the Congressional Black Caucus has been doing this for 40 years now. I want to again recognize our founding members for their perspicacity and their perseverance. We still have two of those members serving with us, Congressman Charles Rangel and Congressman John Conyers, and to let the American people know that we will continue to fight on their behalf tomorrow and every day, as long as it's necessary. And I yield back to you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Christensen. I am so proud to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus with a 40-year history and legacy of fighting for justice and looking out for the most vulnerable and giving voice to people who would not have a voice in this United States Congress. And I'd like to, we're about ready to close, and I'd like to end the evening and the hour by pointing to those at home, those in this chamber. There was an op-ed in today's paper that actually brings together the two forces that Dr. King was bringing together even just before he was so tragically assassinated, bringing together the civil rights movement and the labor movement. In an op-ed today in today's Washington Post entitled "A Middle-Class Dream That Cannot Die," Benjamin Todd Jellis, who's the president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, and Mary Kay Henry, who is the president of the international president of the Service Employees International Union, draw together that middle-class dream for the American people that's built on a foundation of civil rights and social justice and partnered with labor and working people. I am a man. I'd like to close this evening by reminding again all of us that April 4th and the days, the years that we remember in between are years about building upon a tragedy to build a legacy. I am a man. And Dr. King reminded us again about the fight for jobs and retirement security and health care and care for the most vulnerable. Those are still today's struggles. The workers that we've spoken about in Wisconsin and Ohio and Indiana and all across this country who struggle for that dignity, I am a man. Dr. King's words in his famous speech, "I've been to the mountaintop," that he spoke just before he was assassinated. And I just want to read a portion of that that really speaks to me as a member of Congress, as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And Dr. King said, and I quote, "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And with that, I yield.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, is recognized for 30 minutes.
I thank the Speaker, and I'm glad I was able to get in on the tail end of that previous special order as a proud resident of the state of Georgia. Of course, we have the King Center open to folks each and every day of the week, and if folks have not had a chance to go by and see that, it's really a fantastic testimony to the life and times of a gentleman whose true impact on this country we may not know for generations and generations to come. I could not be prouder to have that with me, so I very much appreciate being able to listen in. I, too, am down here to talk about opportunity tonight. It's April 4th. It's tax season, and the fair tax is a proposal that is near and dear to my heart, and a proposal that I believe has its time coming in opportunity. The largest tax that 80% of American families pay, Mr. Speaker, is the payroll tax, that FICA tax that our teenagers begin to see when they take on their part-time jobs. 80% of American families pay more in that FICA tax than they do in income taxes or any other tax on their ledger, and yet we spend all of our time talking about income taxes. We rarely take a look at the payroll tax. We'll spend hours on the House floor talking about tax credits and tax deductions and tax expenditures and tax exemptions. We'll talk about lobbyists and the tax opportunities that they're looking for their big business clients. We'll talk about loopholes and all of the unfairness of the United States tax code, but we rarely talk about the payroll tax. It has been my commitment here in this month of April, which is one of the few times during the year that everyone's willing to focus on taxes for an extended period of time, to come down here and implore my colleagues to take a look at the fair tax and join us in our fight to repeal the income tax, both the personal income tax and the corporate income tax, the payroll tax, the capital gains tax, the gift tax, dividend tax, estate tax, self-employment tax, and on, to replace them all with a single rate personal consumption tax, the fair tax. I was talking with a CEO in my district while I was home who said, "Rob, we're trying to leave America just as fast as we can. You've passed some laws recently that make it a little harder for us to do that. It's going to take us some time, but we're leaving as fast as we can because America is just not a climate to do business in anymore." We heard my colleagues who spoke previously say that our unemployment isn't because people are being fired, it's because new people are not being hired, and the folks who generate those jobs are the small businesses in this country. How do you generate those jobs when you have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, when you have some of the highest self-employment taxes in the world, and on and on and on? We can do a lot in this country to destroy success. We can't do a lot to create success. We have a platform here in this country already on which anyone, by the sweat of their brow, can make something of themselves. And yet, the Home Depot, one of the founders of Home Depot, a very proud company from the great state of Georgia, wrote in the Wall Street Journal last year, if he and his 3 colleagues got together today to try to start that company, they would fail. That they could not succeed in starting a company in today's business environment, the regulatory environment, the labor environment, and the tax environment. Here in April, I'll be returning to the floor each and every day through April 15th to talk about one little part of the fair tax. We talked a little bit last Friday about how it does away with every single corporate exemption on the books, every loophole, every credit, every favor, absolutely everyone, and it's the only bill in Congress that does that, Mr. Speaker. Eliminates every single corporate loophole in the tax code because we know that businesses don't pay taxes anyway. We eliminate the corporate income tax and we allow that to be paid at the personal consumer level. Tonight I just want to talk about jobs. I want to talk about that jobs don't come from the federal government. That jobs don't even come from big corporations. Jobs come from small entrepreneurs and risk takers. The power to tax is the power to destroy. And we have used the power to tax income, to tax that productiveness that each and every American goes to work for every day. Our founding fathers had a different view. They taxed consumption. They put tariffs on the goods that they imported from overseas under the theory that if you had enough money to spend on a silver tea set from England, you had enough money to participate in the federal, in funding your federal government. That all changed in the early part of the 20th century, and we have an opportunity to change it back. H.R. 25, the fair tax, the single most largely co-sponsored tax bill in either the House or the Senate, more co-sponsors on that bill than any other piece of fundamental tax legislation. We need more help. Today we have 59 co-sponsors of that legislation, and we need more help to make the fair tax a reality. We'll have, over the next 15 days, those opportunities. You can visit our webpage at woodall.house.gov. You can visit the Fair Tax folks' webpage at fairtax.org. Come and see what the fair tax offers in terms of opportunity. Opportunity. The current tax code brings power to this city. Whether you sit on the left or whether you sit on the right, something happens when you get to Washington. You suddenly believe you're the smartest person in the room. And you begin to find ways to manipulate people's behavior in hopes that you can make them happy too. Well, I could create a world my father would love and my mother would hate. We're not in the business of making people happy. We're in the business of ensuring opportunity. We can absolutely ensure that everyone in this country is poor. We cannot ensure that everyone is rich. We can only provide opportunity. The fair tax provides that opportunity by completely removing the impediments that are there to growth today. 80% of American families pay more in payroll taxes than income taxes. As you fill out your tax forms headed towards April 15th, I want you to look at that income tax figure. And if you're self-employed, you'll see the self-employment tax figure there beside it. 80% of American families never get touched by a tax bill that we do here. As we move the fair tax forward, we're going to change that, and we're going to make America an opportunity society once again. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to you for indulging me this evening, talk a little about a passion that's near and dear to my heart, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair leaves before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Baca of California for today.
Okay. Pursuant to Clause A of Rule 1, Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the Chair.
Today,